Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone across the globe joining us today. This is Bridget from Acquia. Today's webinar is Customer Insights for CX Personalization, Which Data Matters Most? With Darren Mason, who is an independent CX specialist, Cyril Cost from DTX Advisory, and Eric Fullerton from Acquia. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any audio issues, please send them in the Q&A tab and I will assist you. If you have any questions for the presenters, please submit them in the Q&A tab as well, and they will answer them throughout or at the end of the presentation. Slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted on acquia.com and also sent to you via email within the next few days. Without further ado, I will pass it over to Darren.
Oh, hi there, thanks, and a very warm welcome to everybody joining, and a good afternoon from London. Today's latest customer experience webinar from Acquia has just been said. It's the Customer Insights for CX Personalization. Which data matters the most? And before I introduce our esteemed panel of guests, let me just run you quickly through our agenda today. So we've got a lot to cover. We have a few introductions first, and then we're going to get right into our first theme, which is how to choose the right data. Then look at how to use that data to personalize the customer experience. Have a look at some of the more recent advances in CX technology. And finally, we're just going to peer into the future and have a look at those future CX developments that are on the horizon. And as you just heard, we're very keen that we hear your views and you participate or address your questions to the panel. So again, at the bottom of your screen there, you'll see a Q&A tab. Please pop your questions into there. And also during and after, let's continue the conversation. And on Twitter, you can do that using the hashtag AcquiaCX. So let's get started and introduce you to the panel. And we've got some great experts on the panel today for you. Let me start with Cyril Cost. Now, Cyril is actually a Frenchman living in London and actually one of the global top 100 digital transformation influencers. And I think second in the UK. Now, he's a digital transformation advisor and he helps companies to leverage everything digital, from data to IT, operations, and strategy, so that they can deliver the best customer experience for their customers. And also, I hope you don't mind me saying, Cyril, but you're a travel guru, you're a travel expert, and you love finding great opportunities across the world. And I think this year, Japan and Central and South America are on your hit list. So you're one of the planet's wanderers, I think. So greetings. Can you hear me okay, Cyril?
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, Darren.
Okay, fantastic. And we also are joined today by Eric Fullerton. Now, Eric, he's based in Boston, and he's the product marketing lead for Acquia's personalization and engagement solutions. And he spent his time basically helping customers realize the benefits of a customer-first data strategy. And coincidentally, Eric is also a bit of a travel buff, I think it's fair to say, Eric. And your claim to fame, I believe, is that you visited more countries than there are states of America, which is quite impressive. And I think you're planning to add Israel this year to the collection as well.
Yes, indeed. It's going to be a fun year and a fun webinar.
Fantastic. And as you've heard, my name is Darren Mason. I'm an independent CX advisor and speaker. I've spent 20 years at both Oracle and Siebel Systems, for those of you that are familiar with those organizations. I'm based in Edinburgh, in Scotland, in a little village actually called Blackness. And for those of you who are big fans of Outlander, there's a castle in Blackness that they filmed that there, and it's also starring in Mary Queen of Scots, which is in your cinemas right now. So that's way too much information for you, and you can get more on LinkedIn if you want to look at our presenters, or using the Twitter handles you can see on the screen. What I'd like to do to kick off, actually, we'd like to hear a bit more about you. So we want to kick off with our first poll question. And our first poll question is really about what stage you are at in your personalization journey. So I want you to have a look on screen and choose the option that best fits with your current stage. So, for example, are you in the pre-crawl stage where you really haven't started your personalization journey yet? Are you just crawling, just beginning that journey? Would you describe yourself as more walking, so you're doing some personalization, or are you really running? You're doing advanced personalization using a number of data sources. So vote now. Tell us what stage you're at in your personalization journey. And Eric, I think you're monitoring the poll there, so you'll be able to give some idea of how it's clocking up.
Yes, I can see it now. I can see right now we're looking at the vast majority here in the pre-crawl and crawl stages. About 83% of the attendees are saying that they're in those stages. Just one or two in the walk, and then so far we don't have any self-proclaimed runners. So
nobody owning up to that. Interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's great, and that's a good precursor to our first question, really, that I'd like to put to the panel, because our first theme area is how to choose the right data from the whole plethora that's available today. Because when CRM systems first emerged on the scene kind of 15 to 20 years ago, we really only had first-party data. And that really means we only had the data that customers gave us directly ourselves, the stuff that we're able to gather directly from customers. But now, of course, the choice of data out there is massive. There's a rich landscape of customer data available. So what I'd like to ask the panel is, can you give us, just at a high level view of the different types of data that are now available to CX professionals? And let's kick off with Eric, since you're on the line. What different types of data do people have at their disposal now?
Sure, thank you. So I think one thing to keep in mind is, you mentioned it with CRM, the time when we are trying to collect on your email and your name as the primary way to engage with someone or to personalize an experience, that's no longer really where we want to be focused and collecting on. That baseline information, though, is still really important. And that's really the beginning for folks who are in these early stages. We see it here in this poll. Looks like 85% are in pre-crawl or crawl. So for them, that baseline data and that baseline data and information is really things like what device is someone on, what operating system are they using, what geolocation are they coming from, when did they visit, whether they're a first-time visitor or new or returning visitor. That baseline data really important and critical for those pre-crawl and crawl use cases. But at the same time, what I think we really want to be focused on and thinking about now is that next level insight, which is around the activity data and then the behavioral data. So activity data is the things that someone may be doing on your site or on an app or even in store offline. Things like how long they're spending on a site or on an app, what different pages that they're looking at, how what things that they're clicking on, what ads they're clicking on, what information they're clicking on, what things that they're downloading or using, what kind of products that they've purchased, right? So that's that activity data, which is kind of the next level insight. And then I think the most important, maybe more aligned to some of the walk and run use cases, though, is going to be that behavioral data. And this is where we're taking that baseline data and information plus the activity data and actually making inferences from that to understand, well, maybe where in the purchasing funnel is someone, what type of content is their favorite type or preferred type of content, what product is their favorite, or what channel is their most preferred, and even more so, they're like, what is their visitor or buyer type, right? Is this a power user or one of your your top tier type of visitors? So I like to think of those three data types to collect, the baseline, the activity, and the behavioral data as a good baseline to think about the three different types of data, but also to realize in the time we have now, we're really able to get a lot more information about that activity and the behavioral, and that's going to really, when it comes to personalization, those are going to be the things that are going to inspire that next action in a holistic customer journey. So that's what I would say about that one.
No, interesting. And Cyril, how about from your point of view? Would you have anything to add to those points?
Well, what Eric said is absolutely right. I will just add that you need to take into consideration the freshness of the data that you are going to collect. They say it's a bit dangerous, especially when you start to try to capture everything you can about a customer, about its activity. Always only capture information and data that you know you are going to use and leverage, because data hoarding is one of the biggest issues I'm seeing right now with my clients who are a bit more advanced in the personalization stage. So think about the freshness of the data, because some information that you are going to capture now will not be validated, will not be true in a couple of years' time. So only capture data that you know you are going to be able to leverage either right now or in the near future.
Yeah. Now that's really interesting. I'd love to explore actually that last point that you said, Cyril. And I mean, Eric, you mentioned a lot of data there. You know, if people really want to start running, there's immense amounts of data. So I guess my question to you is: can we ever capture too much data from customers?
Well, I think it maybe would depend on the answer to the first poll question. For folks maybe in that run stage, there's a lot more information that they'd look to be collecting. But I think given, you know, the audience and what we're thinking about, you know, there may be too much data for someone who's just at that that crawl stage, because for them, they're trying to action the data and information they're collecting. So I think that I'd kind of offer the surprising take, at least that initially for those in the beginning stages, you can collect too much data, because depending on the size of your team, your budget, your customer experience goals, that amount of data that's available today, which, while great, is also potentially very overwhelming for these types of teams. So I'd say, I think the best way to start is by collecting the data that you have an intent to action. And maybe you, of course, do want to think in a future forward way, right? Not just what I can use today. But the data that's most relevant to your business, of course, you want to go ahead and collect that, but make sure that you're not bogging yourself down by collecting data for data's sake. And that's kind of what Cyril addressed when we think about the data hoarding too.
So that's interesting. It's like so your message really is only take enough data off the data buffet that you're going to actually consume. You know, don't pile your plate too high, because it's just pointless.
Yeah, especially for those just starting out. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a couple of angles to that though. So one is the consumability. Can your organization consume the amount of data that you're capturing? And I guess from the customer's perspective, there's another angle on this, isn't there? And that is, how can we collect the right amount of data without being overly intrusive for customers? So Cyril, I mean, you know, is there a point where it's just too intrusive to capture too much information about a customer?
Let me share with you two statistics that basically will help to answer this question. So recently Accenture ran a survey, and 83% of the customers are willing to share their data to enable a personalized experience. So people are not afraid to share their personal information. But at the same time, they don't want a creepy experience. They say 41% find it creepy, you know, when you enter in a store, you receive a text or a message from the retailer, for example. So this gives you an idea about what customers are today willing to accept. So personalization, yes, but don't be intrusive. Don't put in their face the fact that you know where they are, with who they are, what are they currently buying, what are they currently sharing. You know, it's not because you have the information that you have to act on it. So this will be my first part of the answer.
Okay, and just as a quick reminder to our audience, please, if you do have any questions, do you have any comments on what you've just heard, please pop them into the Q&A section of the Zoom application there, and you'll see that at the bottom of your screen. Eric, you'll let me know if there's anything coming through that interjects well with what we're talking about, I guess.
Sure will.
I just want to raise an interesting issue that you spoke about there, Cyril, just to come back to you on that, and that is there's a regulatory angle to this, isn't there? Because last year in Europe, in May, we saw the introduction of the General Data Protection Regulations, the GDPR, and I think it's starting to bite, isn't it, Cyril, from a European perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a few days ago, so the French agency in charge of the data protection in France just fined Google for $57 million.
Wow.
So yeah, probably 27 other countries are going to follow this lead. But yeah, basically they just wanted to start with a big fish, I think. Just a reminder that GDPR doesn't apply only to EU companies or EU citizens, but to any companies in the world that hold data about EU citizens. So I say even if you are in North America or in Asia, you are concerned about GDPR.
Right. Okay. So it's not just for European companies.
No.
It's for anybody operating in Europe, really. That's what you're saying there. Okay, before we go on to our next poll question, Eric, can I just ask you, is there anything that we need to add from any chat coming through before we proceed?
No, not from the chat, but there was one thought that I actually wanted to mention around the personalization and the quote unquote creep factor is, we have the consumers and your customers and your visitors are indicating to you what channels they want to engage with you on. So when they are very active on a mobile app, they're indicating that, that exchange of information is appropriate on the app. And same thing when they come to the website or when they, click on links and emails and things like that. So I think there's a responsibility almost from any organization or business to ensure that the channels that we've agreed to converse on and to communicate on are the ones that we should use. And I think when you try and go outside of that, maybe trying to reach out to them on channels, maybe they haven't heard from you or interacted with you in the past, that's really when things can become a little bit fishy, and that creep factor can maybe impact a customer experience and really leave a sour taste in one's mouth. So I think it's important to realize and understand that the channels that you're engaging on with your customer, they're telling you what channels they want to engage with and what channels they want to engage with your brand on. Just because you go and have a coffee with someone doesn't mean that they can drop by your house. It's kind of like
that was the analogy I was thinking of. You wouldn't want the you wouldn't want the guy at the supermarket checkout to show up on your doorstep.
Sure,
uninvited,
exactly.
That is.
and that information is there. Right? They're letting us know what's okay and what's not. So I think it's important to stick to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So let's move on to our next topic now, and this is our second poll question as well. So what I'd like to know from the audience is, what's your biggest challenge as you seek to improve CX through personalization? So I'm looking at your biggest challenges now. Is it disjointed data? Is it lack of expertise? Is it the technology budget that's the problem? Or is it staff resources or time? So from your perspective, or even if you're an agency from your customer's perspective, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing? So just choose one of those: disjointed data, lack of expertise, the technology budget, or staff resources or time. So just vote now. And Eric, you can tell me where people are falling with that.
Sure, we're actually seeing a pretty mixed crowd so far. Okay. I'd actually be curious to give it a few more seconds, just because right now we're at 27% disjointed data, 27% lack of expertise, 18% lack of technology budget, 27% lack of resources or time. So it certainly appears as though and now we've just hit 25% for all of them. So it certainly seems like there's a host of these different challenges. And
that's interesting. So maybe they are all major challenges by the sounds of things to that.
Sounds like it may have been a good question, because it seems like those are things that are impacting all the folks.
And of course, if anybody has any different challenges, pop them into the Q&A section as a comment, and we can address that as we go along as well. So let's get right into this: how to use data to personalize CX, because now we've collected all of that rich data. How do we put it to work in our personalization across the customer journey? So let's maybe kick off with Eric. How do we activate that data, Eric, within the customer journey?
Yeah, sure. I think when we think about the data, it's first, part of it is engaging on those channels and using that data and information, specifically things like what type of content one is engaging with or what type of behaviors, but using the channels that you are most comfortable with and ones that are really maybe the highest impact. So I think that for organizations and folks who are just starting out, and I think we have some of them on this call, it's really what is maybe the lowest hanging fruit? So maybe it may be my website or maybe it's my mobile app that I can actually start delivering a personalized experience on, and something that's maybe going to really initiate an action from someone. So I think that there's a lot of different places to start. It can be really overwhelming given all the data that you've collected, and there's all these systems and tools. So I think that the focus is, and what we talk about it, and we actually kind of alluded to it in the poll question, is this approach of crawl, walk, run, which is, sure, it's easy to think about all these, I like to call them North Star personalizations, which are at the end of kind of like where I'd love to be. But in order to get there, you really have to familiarize yourself with the data and information, build a personalized experience, and really this crawl phase. So what's the lowest hanging fruit where I can have the highest impact? And thinking about it in that sense, I think is the best way to kind of really start, and also to prepare yourself for the things you want to accomplish in the future. So focus on that kind of low hanging fruit. Think about the customer journey and where you can inspire someone to action most is how I think about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it'd be really good to kind of then bring this into the real world. That's kind of a good overview. And I was going to ask Cyril actually about examples of customers that he's come across, or examples of services that he's come across that really, put data to use in a highly effective way. So Cyril, do you have some of those examples that you could share?
Sure. So one example of a very performing personalization is, for example, Spotify, where you have your personal taste in terms of music are compared to your peers, if you want, and depending on what they have listened in the past week, you will receive a personalized list. So here you have different factors. So it's just not the type of music, but it may also be how much music you consume, maybe your gender. I don't have details about the algorithm that is behind this, but basically you have an idea about, if I like pop rock from the 70s, what will come next week for everybody who also like pop rock from the 70s. Some other example is a project I worked on a few years ago, which was for an energy company, for an electric grid company in the north of England. And it was basically to push some messages in case of a blackout. Just to explain, not necessarily the reason, but when the electricity will be back. And the message need to be personalized depending on the audience. Some people have learning disabilities, some people cannot move. So basically, depending where you push a message, if it's on the smart meter, on the tablet, etc., they will have different challenges. And for some people, it will be also critical information because they have medical device at home, for example, that will require electricity, so they need to go somewhere else. So of course, this is an extreme example.
Yes.
But most of the other examples will be in the financial services, of course, where you try to build customer journeys, not just linked to a product. So for example, if I buy a house, I will need a mortgage. But if I have a house, I also need a home insurance. If I have a home, I'm likely to have a car, so sell car insurance. And we've been talking about this personalization of this type of customer journeys for ages, but very, very few banks are able still to deliver a comprehensive and end-to-end personalization.
Yes.
Just to come back to what Eric said earlier, mentioning that where you start in this journey, you need the customer journeys, but also you need to define your personas before. Be sure that you have 3-4 personas that likely will clearly define what type of customers you are going to work with, because it's important. A millennial will react differently in terms of personalization compared to someone probably more in their 40s, 50s, someone who is more, someone who use digital every day in their life will have a different experience from someone who is less tech savvy. So just be sure that also when you define your customer journey, you have clear persona, because you will not personalize the same amount of information or content to them, and you probably need to have a bit more explanation with them and explain how it works. So it's an educational message here.
Interesting. So personas first before you start mapping those to journeys.
Yeah.
Really, really important message. Actually, your Spotify example brought to mind the example of Netflix that I was researching the other day, because I think Netflix, 60% of their content is consumed through that wall of tiles that you have on the screen at the start, which is highly personalized to you, and their personalization algorithm, which they're constantly tuning, is actually a mission critical asset for them. I think it saves them something like $1 billion a year in terms of targeting content buying and making sure that they optimize that and reduce churn in their customer base as well. So that's a fascinating story as well. But Eric, anything that you'd like to add in terms of examples of people that are really doing a great job of this whole area of personalization?
Yeah, so I do have one, but I think we actually just got a question on the line.
Okay.
So I think I'd rather go through this.
Yeah,
Sure. So really great question. Something that we see a lot, which says, I looked after our CRM platform, but there is so much data that I'm finding it hard to pick out metrics that are the most worthwhile to track over time. That said, I don't just want to have the data sit in a spreadsheet. So what are your best tips on taking action from that? So I can start with this answer, and then maybe Cyril, you can jump in as well. This is something that we see very, very often. I have so much stuff I don't really know where to start. It's most helpful to know a little bit about your business. So if it's B2C or if it's B2B, or if you're in retail or if you're in technology, that'll maybe help align these types of things. But I think in general, and the individual who asked the question, please feel free to add any more insight so we can be more prescriptive with the answer. But just at a really high level, we think about the types of personalizations that are ones to start with. And the things that, at least here, we see our customers start with most often are going to be ones around things like geolocation and marketing campaigns and visit frequency. So geolocation, super valuable for organizations that do local events, really valuable for retail organizations, for example, who have different kind of weather patterns. So folks maybe in California in maybe not seeing the same thing as something on the East Coast in the US, or same thing for folks in the UK, maybe not seeing the same thing as some folks from coastal regions of Spain and France, right? So not really thinking about what types of offers and deals may vary there. Marketing campaigns is something we see often. So if folks are coming from an email, not just seeing a genericized experience from that. So folks who, if you've engaged with a certain asset or content piece, whether it be on social or whether it be on email, making sure that that's going to be consistent through an app or through a website. And then visit frequency is something that I think people are able to wrap their head around a little bit easier, which is someone who comes to my site for the first time, I want them to see something a little bit different than someone who's been to my site or my app 5 times in the last week and is considered a loyal user, or kind of a power user or something like that. So just at a really high level, those are, I think, good places to start. Also, device type and system, and time of day or time of week even, right? So is someone visiting on the weekend, and are those offers maybe going to be different versus someone who's visiting during the week during work hours? And then are they coming on a phone, or are they coming on a laptop? And if, for folks who are coming on phones, maybe they'd like to see something very specific. They're often, we see a lot of our customers they prioritize maps and location-based services for those on mobile devices, with the assumption that if someone's coming to the site from mobile, they're maybe looking to figure out how to get around or maybe where to go. And those on laptops are more likely to be doing kind of more browsing-based behavior, looking for settle down and do some research. So Cyril, I'm not sure if you had anything you'd like to add to that at the high level. And we did get some more insight from the attendee who said that they're a B2C business. They are a nature company who produces drinks. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. Yes, that was quite a comprehensive list that you that you provided. I would say, if you're a B2C business, clearly the most important, the key KPI is a churn rate, because your acquisition cost, even in digital world, is very high. So basically, this is something you need to measure. Pay a lot of attention to the repeat orders and the average basket. That will give you really a clear indication about how you are doing with your customer. In order to increase this kind of long-term relationship, Eric mentioned it, but engagement is really important. So engagement across all the different channels, because you may, run a survey or a competition on Twitter, and you may post some information about your new products on Facebook. So keep track of which channel they tend to use to push the right offer at the right moment in order to get an order.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you are faced with a daunting amount of data, and maybe it's data that you've just always collected as a legacy of your CRM systems, and sometimes it is difficult to see the wood from the trees, isn't it? And I think, from my perspective, it's almost going back to first principles and say, what do you want to measure? So ignore the data for a second, and using your customer journey principles and using the KPIs at each stage of the journey that you like to measure, it's then going back afterwards to the data and saying, well, is that something that we are measuring? Because it may well be in that whole heap of CRM data that you are capturing a lot of the information to build those KPIs, but it may well be that some of the stuff isn't appropriate anymore. You need to build some more stuff in. So I guess it's the starting point, I guess, needs to be the objectives and the KPIs that you need to measure. But hopefully those replies went some way to answering those questions. And it's just a quick reminder, if you do want to ask the panel a question, please pop that into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom conference screen there. And also afterwards, of course, you can use the hashtag AquaCX on Twitter to continue the conversation. Before we come off this subject, guys, it occurred to me that there's probably examples of really bad personalization. I mean, we've highlighted some of the best examples, but has anybody got examples of where maybe without naming names perhaps, but where something's been done really poorly? And I think we've all come across those. I mean, Eric, let's start with you. Any really bad examples of personalization that you've seen?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so I have a couple examples of times when maybe a line was crossed, but I mean, for me, it's actually thinking about some times when we've had some organizations build a personalization that seemed almost so irrelevant that it was just almost a waste of time and effort. So we've seen a couple things where we have a regional business and they built out an entire practice about kind of providing a background image of kind of what their landscape looks like, what a cityscape, and making sure that was personalized to that group. And the conversation we had after they did that was really, so what value is this providing to the organization? So this is a little bit divergent from your question, but it's not just about the bad personalizations, but it's about the value that a personalization is providing. So this one example, they had 98% of their business was for the region that they were then personalizing this entire experience for, but they didn't necessarily need to spend the time and effort to do that. So not trying to name names, but it was really, bad personalization. Yes, there are some times, for examples when we've seen it, rub folks the wrong way, but it's also not so great when it doesn't provide any value or differentiation to the individual experience. So to me, that's one thing that popped into my head immediately around kind of quote unquote bad personalization.
It's interesting you triggered off a thought, because I spent a lot of time looking at digital marketing, and in the ad tech area, advertising technology, we're all retargeted with banner adverts depending on our behavior or our intent online. And I think I come across this all the time, where organizations are retargeting me with products that I've already bought, which is kind of the classic poor personalization. But I don't know whether you have anything to add to that, Eric, before we progress to our next section.
For Cyril or for myself?
For Cyril, sorry. Cyril, anything?
Yeah. No. Yes. Just a quick example with out of date personalization. So I think it happened to all of us when you look for a hotel or a travel, and you book something, and after 4 weeks you still get these messages, about, oh, are you still interested in this hotel? Are you still interested in this travel? And so this is why, when you capture information, so just to go back to my earlier point, freshness of the data is important. So don't forget that you may not know everything about your customer, but clearly if they are interested in a hotel or travel, and in the next week or 2 weeks they haven't booked, you can stop trying to push your product or content to them.
Excellent. Thank you, Cyril.
Darren, we have a couple more questions, but I think I think it'd be nice if we made. Anna actually just asked one, and we have another one. But I think it'd be great if we could maybe make some progress. We will absolutely answer all the questions that have been answered. I know that we're already getting short on time, which is good.
Great, excellent. Well, let's get on to this next section then quickly, and we've got the last two sections are fairly rapid. And this is talking about recent advances in technology. The latest buzz in CX tech is in the areas like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And ultimately, I guess these have to be data driven. So how are you seeing this being deployed in the field? Let's start with you, Eric, in terms of new technology, kind of these recent advances generally, but maybe AI and ML.
Yeah, I think at a high level, we're seeing a lot of maturity around the AI and kind of ML strategy and approach. And one thing that I've seen work really well is kind of differentiating between the strategy and the execution around some of these algorithms and technology. So the value of a machine learning algorithm or leveraging AI is that that's going to be able to handle the execution layer. So this is the kind of the mantra that I think is that people can help with strategy, right? What are the personas that I'm trying to identify? What is the content that I'm creating? What is the experience that I want to deliver? And then leveraging these really powerful algorithms, whether they be similarity algorithms, the ones that we see with the product recommendations that we see in Amazon, or kind of the content type recommendations we can see with Netflix, and handling the execution layer at that algorithm based and that AI based level. And I think that's a really nice way to think about it. And that's the way that I think we've seen some success recently with our customers and just across the space, which is, if you can allow your teams to focus on the high level strategy and leverage these algorithms kind of at the execution layer, that I think is the way to kind of action this at your own organization. And this may not be the most complex algorithm, right? We have a lot of folks that are maybe in that pre-crawl phase. This doesn't mean you have to launch hundreds of different algorithms to do this, right? You can leverage one different system or algorithm to kind of provide something that's most similar to something that someone is looking at right now, or something that is most similar to what they've looked at in the past. So I think it kind of can be an overwhelming space for folks. What does this all mean? And how do I leverage it? But at the high level, people do strategy, and the AI, the ML tech, that's something that can handle that execution layer to free you up.
Sure. And Cyril, how about you? I mean, what are the latest advances that you're seeing making an impact on personalization?
So there was a Gartner report not a long time ago that said that by 2020, 30% of the content that we will consume from the web will be non-text based, which basically means it will be via vocal assistant or a smart speaker, as they are also called. What that means is that for your personalization, don't think in a transactional way. Don't think screen based. Your journeys must cover all different touch points on channels, and that's really important. It's not just about data, but also how you are going to personalize, because if I start a journey with a chatbot, let's say I want to place an order, maybe the first information I'm going to give the chatbot will be my delivery address, and then it will be my credit card number, and then it will be my size, and then it will be the clothes I'm interested in. So an experience in a journey that is completely different from what I have currently on all websites online. And AI and ML, there is when you are going to start on this, if you haven't started yet, don't forget that machine learning, you always start with a very small set of data in order to train the algorithm. And the quality of the data is critical at that point, because if you train a model on a bad set of data, you are going to have a bad results later when you are going to apply the algorithm. So this is maybe a bit more too advanced, but yeah, my key takeaway is don't think working with chatbot on all vocal interaction tools, don't think transactional in the same way as we have seen for the past 20 years in the web.
Yes. That's really good points. Before we go and find out what the audience think, I think the final thing that I would add from my experience is that, you know, we've all heard of the Internet of Things and your IoT devices now. I think the consumer-based devices are exceeding, you know, the B2B kind of manufacturing type of devices. And here I'm talking about things like wearable technology, maybe your sports watch, your smartwatch. I'm also talking about any other devices in your home that are connected to the internet, you know, smart home, Hive type of devices perhaps. And these capture an enormous amount of information that we can then use to add to somebody's profile, their behavior, their activity. So for me, in terms of the capture side of data, there's another rich pool of stuff there. But let's see what the audience think about what they think is the technology that offers the greatest opportunity for improving CX. So audience, get on those buttons again and let us know. I mean, do you think that chatbots offer the greatest opportunity? Do you think it's machine learning or artificial intelligence? Is it those voice assistants like Amazon Alexa or Google or Cortana and those things? Or is it the Internet of Things? Is it the IoT that offers the greatest opportunity? And of course, we're talking about your industry, so it'll be different whether you're talking about B2B, B2C industries, retail, financial services, telco. But vote now. Let us know what you think, and I'll pass it over to Eric for a short recap of what's happening on the polls.
Sure, we're seeing machine learning and AI, and then voice leading the way, taking about 85% total. So, and then chatbots and IoT with a couple responses each. So,
okay.
Pretty
great
interesting stuff.
Great. So before we do progress on to the last theme of the webinar today, anything else, Eric, that we want to jump on in terms of questions from the audience?
Yeah, so there is this question which is specific to healthcare. Mm-hmm. And the question is really around, you know, how do I use data and also be compliant? And I'm not sure if we're planning on addressing this one, Darren, but I think that this is a really good point. Maybe it can lead into more conversation. But, you know, is there a data point you'd choose as the most valuable to personalize experiences or in a non-authorized way, but is HIPAA compliant? I'm not sure who's familiar with HIPAA, but it's a healthcare regulation. So for us, I think that, and I can answer this, and Cyril, please feel free to jump in. And for this poll, by the way, we saw machine learning as the number one, 50% of folks with machine learning.
Okay, interesting, great.
33% with voice, and then chatbots and IoT with 8% each. So just to try and cover that question, I think there is a lot of opportunity to do personalization in an anonymous way. So not necessarily knowing somebody's name or knowing any personal identifiable information about them, but really focusing on things like their browsing behavior, right? Whether or not they've downloaded an asset, whether or not they've clicked on a specific link or come to your site via an email. Things that you can do to understand really who someone is in terms of whether they're I use the phrase power user, or whether they're someone who we know that they're clicking on this very specific type of content, whether it be for specific information on a doctor or something that may be kind of more general, whether they're researching different healthcare plans or things like that, and making sure that you're leveraging all the data that's available from a browsing behavior and activity perspective, rather than just thinking, all right, so I need to know PII about this person or individual. That's something that is a big challenge for a lot of organizations that are in healthcare. But I think that's important to stress how much you can accomplish with an anonymous personalization on an app, whether it be on a site, and not trying to collect everything that may kind of mess with the HIPAA compliance of your organization. I think that you want to leverage things that, of course, are appropriate, but there's a lot that one can do from an anonymous perspective, and I think that's a good way to highlight that.
Okay. Thanks for that, Eric. We are short of time, so I would like to get onto that final question. We're running about 5 minutes behind schedule, so and obviously if there's more questions, we can address those after the webinar as well.
Sure.
But let me go on to talk about future developments just for a few minutes at the end of this webinar. Let's have a peer into the future. I mean, what future trends and innovations are you seeing, the panel seeing, in the area of data personalization? And are there any little clues or hints to the trends that are coming in the future? So let me ask Cyril about that. What are you seeing when you get your crystal ball out, Cyril?
Very good question. If only I knew. No, I think all the wearables technology are going to be a key part to personalize our experience, how we are going to capture data. So as a kind of IoT-based type of product, or how we are going to receive information via our wearables. So right now, what we call wearables are mostly smartwatches and some kind of sport devices. But coming, we will have glasses, or clothes, or shoes. So we are going to enter a new age where basically the personalization is going to be part of our body, is going to join us. In order to do this, so 5G, so the future network, telecommunication network, will need to be deployed, and to enable this communication between billions and billions of objects with your servers, with your algorithm. So this is still a few years ahead. It's probably going to start mostly in Japan, Singapore, and then the rest of Asia before reaching Europe. But this is really where we are going, in my view.
Really interesting. And Eric, I'm going to give you the last word on this subject. So what do you think in terms of peering into the future?
Sure. I think that one thing that I've noticed in seeing the successes of today as a clue to what's going to happen in the future. I think of, we've talked about Netflix, we've talked about Amazon. I think Starbucks is another great example. And the theme that they're using to see success is, I think, is going to help drive the future of personalization and customer experience holistically, which is that personalization is an exchange. It's an agreement of sorts. And it's an agreement that if I'm going to provide you with my data and information, that you're going to then use it not only responsibly, but in a way that's going to provide me with a certain level of convenience or an improved experience. So we see Starbucks, for example, they know all this information about your preferences, your location visit, your order history, but that exchange is, you're going to use that responsibly, but also allow me to maybe not have to wait in line, swipe my credit card, do things like that. Same thing with Amazon. I'm providing you a lot of information about what my preferences are, but that means that it's easier and more effective for me to shop. I think that we're seeing those types of things. That, to me, that's really that's what's going to be the driving force behind successful personalization, is those brands and those organizations who are really walking that line between the responsible use of data, but also using it in a way that is going to be effective for the end user, and kind of, you know, that agreement or exchange, I think is really important for the future of personalization, especially as we talked about it here, that potential, are you being creepy? Are you kind of coming too far, right? Making sure that you're striking that appropriate balance between the convenience and the exchange of data and information. So less about the technological component, but more around like the ethos almost of how personalization is going to continue to be successful.
Yeah, really interesting, and that really good points to finish on, and it's exciting, isn't it? I mean, the future channels of capture of information and what we're going to be able to do with it is a great prospect for the future of CX personalization, and I think we're all excited on the panel about that.
Absolutely.
So finally, Eric, are there any major questions that we should address? We're pretty much out of time now.
No, I think one thing we can follow up on, we did have one question from an attendee around the voice search statistics, and asking maybe for some more specific stats around voice search and things like that for the UK. That might be something we could follow up with
okay,
on Twitter or something like that. And then other things around data onboarding. I know we're out of time, but I think those are maybe something that we could follow up with on the Twitter chat.
Yeah, well, we will be following up, and we'll be looking at all of your questions for that. But I'd really like to say a big thank you to Eric Fullerton. Thanks, Eric, for your insights, and thank you to Cyril Cost as well for some brilliant statistics and examples there. And for the audience, of course, thank you for joining us for this Acquia panel discussion and webinar. If you'd like to continue the discussion via social media, please use the Twitter hashtag AcquiaCX. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you.